Everyone, welcome to the Future of Fish panel. We are extremely fortunate to be joined by some leading experts to discuss the status of alternative fish protein today and where it's headed. And we are thrilled to have Stephanie von Stein with us today, who oversees and provides strategic support for GFI's international affiliate organizations in 5 regions as they work to advance the alternative proteins industry. And we've got Chris Kerr, who's the founding partner and CIO at Unovis. We have Dr. Miles Woodruff, who's the CEO and co-founder of Sophie's Kitchen, a leading plant-based seafood innovator. And I'm Elise Burnell, an impact advisor with the Greenbaum Foundation. Hi, guys. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Great to have you. Why don't we start with your opinions and thoughts on the future of fish? I know that's very vast, but if you guys could just very briefly talk about your company or organization and in which way they focus on plant-based products in the seafood industry. Maybe Stephanie, could we start with you and your work at GFI?
Sure, and I will have dogs barking in the background. I apologize ahead of time. So at GFI, we work to advance the science, markets, and policy for alternative proteins globally. And within that, alternative seafoods is one of the areas that we work. Sorry about that. In which we work. We actually have a distinct program called the Sustainable Seafood Initiative that's staffed with 2 really sharp team members, and they kind of work globally with all of our teams to advance alternative seafood products throughout 5 different regions. And so that's what we do. And when I say alternative seafood, I mean plant-based, cultivated and fermented seafood products.
Thank you. And we'll get into that in a little bit, the distinction between the types of alternative proteins in that realm. Chris, do you mind if we jump to you now and have you just mention the work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So I run a venture capital firm called Unovis that focuses really exclusively on alternative animal proteins, be that plant-based or cell egg. And part of that process was looking at areas throughout looking at sections of the menu that are under it unaddressed, and one of them was seafood. So we did go ahead and co-found Gathered Foods and the Good Catch plant-based seafood line as one of the forays into one of those solutions. We look at everything on the menu, and so it's not just about creating a base protein and telling consumers what to do with it, but teaching them about it, teaching them how to prepare it, putting it into a form that they're familiar with. So it's the whole spectrum, from the experiential side to the nutrition side to the digestion, making it available, making it fun. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a repeatable culinary experience, and one that creates long-term sustainable behavioral change. And in order to do that, it's got to be a good experience. You're not going to do it. So we really focus on the culinary side, but combining food science with that and bringing awareness to make sure that all of the key drivers are met.
Amazing. And I do need to mention that Good Catch is a sponsor of Mission Blue's Hope Spots that was recently announced. So we were thrilled to have Dr. Sylvia Earle keynote the conference. So that's really cool. Great stuff. Dr. Miles Woodruff, I would love to hear about the work that you've been doing with Sophie's Kitchen and what you see as the challenges in the alternative seafood industry.
Yeah, I think, first of all, they're all opportunities. I was the least likely plant-based person on the planet, so I don't see anything as a challenge. I think everyone is just someone who's going to join us someday, in somehow, in some way. And so what Sophie's Kitchen is a 10-year-old company, one of the first in plant-based foods. And I came in about 3 years ago after wrapping up about 10 years I did with Jane Goodall in the Congo. Conservation is extremely important to me. So everything I do is, how do I have an impact on the planet? How do I have an impact on people? And plant-based foods is just the lowest hanging fruit in conservation, in impact. How do you engage people to make a decision that can change the world? You can't become carbon neutral in a day, but you can go plant-based in a day. You can go plant-based for a meal. And so that's where I think that the plant-based seafood is really just kind of still a white space. And there's a lot of new entrants in the market that are very exciting and joining the cause, and we're very excited about that.
That's amazing. I'm a big fan of your salmon. It tastes so real. No, you guys are doing amazing work. And yeah, as far as any bottlenecks though that could be addressed when it comes to maybe scaling production, is there anything that Dr. Woodruff, either you or Stephanie maybe would want to comment upon, and what we can look forward to in terms of the scaling up and maybe price parity with other products?
I'll just jump in really quick that we're changing from feeding animals protein to feeding humans protein. So there's going to be an adjustment as we get to changing the soy and the pea over to human edible products. And so there's going to be a lag in the conversion of those proteins to human edible products. And then there's also going to be other things such as tank grown algae that's going to come in and start competing with the things that are raised in a traditional agriculture sense.
Thanks. And Stephanie, do you have any comments on the regulatory landscape when it comes either to plant-based, or we haven't really touched upon some of the other products like cellular seafood, but any comments that you have about that would, I'd be really interested to know how you see the landscape right now.
Sure. I'll also comment that from my SSI colleagues, I understand that omega-3 is a bottleneck, and that consumers expect alternative seafood products to be as nutritious as conventional seafood. And so to achieve that, you need to make them with omega-3s, and to do that with plant-based rather than animal-based omega-3s. And the plant-based omega-3 market needs to scale a lot in order to lower that input cost. And that would, once that happens, the products will be able to more easily achieve price parity. On the regulatory front, we haven't seen seafood specific labeling restrictions. There are a handful of states in the United States that have put forward labeling restrictions for plant-based foods. And seafood could easily be part of that, but for the most part, those labeling laws or attempts at passing these laws have targeted terrestrial meat. So hi, I see my colleague Marika is on the call, and she's part of our SSI team. So she's probably can go even further into the weeds on that. But on the global side, we work once a month. Our policy team members from across the globe meet to talk about regulatory issues as well as policy initiatives that they're advancing locally. And from what I understand right now, nothing specific related to seafood, but again, there are efforts to limit plant-based products generally. And France just came out with a proposed regulation against labeling plant-based meats, eggs, dairy, and seafood as such. And our team in Europe is working to make them go through the EU process in order for them to be able to pass that law. So we're hoping that we get to defeat that law.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you, Stephanie. And I just wanted to remind everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A if you have any, and we will get to them in a little bit. But Chris, could I jump to you and just ask you what, at this point, I know a lot has come out in the press. There have been a lot of studies that have surfaced, but how likely do you think it is that cellular meat could go mainstream or compete with conventional products? I know that there's a lot of information out there about the issues around scaling, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll start by saying I'm not that smart to answer that. I mean, the reality is that, how much time do we have? Are we looking at solving this in 50 years or next week? If it's next week, I better find something different. Like, this is going to take a while to scale. The other thing that it's, you need to back up a little bit. We eat between 200 and 300 different types of sea creatures. This is not a one size fits all solution, right? And I might add that you say the same thing about cheese. Not every cheese is delicious to every palate. Not every fish is delicious to every palate. Every different culture is eating different types of seafood. So you need to take that into the equation. And ultimately, to make this work, it better be a really good culinary experience. Because if it's not, people are just going to start eating pizza and chicken and other stuff. Like, this isn't really about just addressing the seafood market. The question is share of stomach, and is seafood going to play a role in that? If fish disappear off of the planet, they're going to be replaced with something else. The question is, can we keep it on the menu and use other alternatives to give that experience? That could be plants, it could be algae. At the end of the day, you're trying to serve something that's rather basic. What's for lunch? Is it delicious? Do I want to have it again next week? And part of that is the amalgamation of a bunch of different ingredients. You're assembling a bunch of different ingredients. Sophie's Kitchen salmon is phenomenal, but I put it on an everything bagel, and I put on vegan cream cheese, and I put onion and capers on the top, and that's the meal that I eat, right? And so that's what you look at, is how do you create that broader culinary experience? And so in the world of cellular aquaculture, you're going to have the same thing. What is the experience? What are you going for? Is this a hero product sitting on top of a sushi? You could probably do that fairly, I'd say, within 10 years, let's say. But that's going to be something that's a hero product that's going to be expensive. You're not going to be able to turn that into a tuna sub at Subway, right? And at the end of the day, we need to solve that entire equation. And that's really how we're looking at this, is how do we break this down into bite-sized chunks, if you will, and to see, well, how do we solve what's needing to be done today? And can we evolve to something that's solving the bigger things down the road?
Awesome, thank you. And I haven't seen that hoodie before, but I would like one.
I just got it. It's like I have the swag that I get depending on what subject matter is. It reminds me why I'm here. So anyway,
love it. Okay, I'm gonna make a note of that. Could I have, maybe we'll go back to Dr. Woodruff. I'd like to know what you all three of you believe are the main challenges. And I know, Dr. Woodruff, you talked about there not being, like, everyone's a potential ally in this down the road. Or maybe if you'd like to talk about what you think are the opportunities, because when Chris mentioned tuna at Subway, I just remember earlier this year, kind of or was it end of last year, the fiasco around there not being any tuna DNA in their subs, and maybe, someone's fish alternative truck pulling up next to Subways with food that you can actually identify. But what do you all see as either the challenges or the opportunities? Dr. Woodruff, let's start with you, please.
Yeah, first of all, Miles, doctors just for the written part. So we're at a really interesting time where companies are fighting to not include the product that's labeled as the food, such as tuna. And at the same time, they're fighting us from creating something that's delicious and doesn't include the same thing. So it's really about how do you create the nutrition profile. And I think, like, Good Catch comes in with omegas and great protein profiles, and we do as well. And I think that's the answer. How do you find out what people are trying to get out of the culinary experience? People don't eat fish because they want a fishy taste. They eat fish because they've been told it's healthy, and there are healthy parts of it. And those are omegas and proteins. And so how do you give people that experience, the mildly seafood flavor with the omegas and the protein, so that they leave happy and full, and they had an experience that has the nostalgic thing that they remember from their youth when they used to be non-vegan. And I think it's really about capturing that. And so I think that's where we're looking at things heading. And it's just an odd time where people are pretending they don't want to sell what they're saying they're selling, but they also don't want plant-based companies to come in and sell something better. Because Subway did get in trouble. I think it was like yesterday, they admitted to having chicken and pork in their tuna, and that's complicated. That's very complicated when you're not matching the labels. And when people come at plant-based foods for not having the labeling correct, we do have the labeling correct. We say clearly on the box what's in the box, whereas other industries get in trouble because they say it's one species and then they give you a different species. We don't actually engage in labeling fraud at all, and most people in the animal agriculture industry don't either, and they find it very frustrating when people do. It's just, I think it's something that we're going to see a lot more of coming up soon.
Absolutely. Stephanie, what are your thoughts?
You asking about challenges or goals?
Yeah, or even opportunities that you
Mm-hmm.
think have popped up in terms of maybe more awareness about the perils of overfishing, even just the discovery of toxins in the fish, plastics in the fish, but certainly challenges that the alternative protein industry in seafood will be facing moving forward.
I think one of the challenges is that I think I mentioned that consumers expect they're eating seafood because they think it's healthier than terrestrial animals. So one of the challenges will be, convincing them that alternative seafood is healthier, or at least on a par with conventional seafood. And so that means, again, scaling the omega-3 supply chain, creating, and also making those products taste as good as conventional seafood. And I know that there is a challenge in creating that flaky texture that is different from, let's say, a ground beef product like Impossible and Beyond have. So that, improved processes are necessary to create those textures. And the fish flavor or aroma is a challenge as well. I understand that it's hard to strike that balance, that it often comes out as tasting too fishy. And so there's a challenge in creating just the right balance and flavor, texture, price point, all of those things.
Sure.
I think, we look at my thesis is global adoption comes through local acceptance, and that's local form, flavor, function, and familiarity. And there's parts of the globe where more pungent fish flavor is what they're looking for. In Germany, Japan, that may be the case. I'm a kid from Philadelphia, and I don't want a fishy flavor. I want pretty neutral. So tuna fish is good for me, but tuna fish with more mayo is better than tuna fish with less mayo. And so really, ultimately you're landing at that culinary experience again. Now, does it have nutritional value? Yeah, that might be a driver. You can have it go the other way. If you're a pregnant woman, you're not going to eat fish, right? So you have these other drivers that come in. You can have shellfish and religion. There's lots of different things. At the end of this, we try to find the driver that moves us to the same landing spot, the same bullseye. You might have a chef that says, I can work with all sorts of proteins, but this protein needs to do good in a hot environment, a wet environment, a dry environment. And if your protein doesn't hold up to that, be that animal protein or plant, now you're dealing with it with a chef, right? And so whether or not he or she is satisfied with that. So we have to work with all of these things. It's to one degree chaos, but the other side of it is you have all sorts of angles of putting your stuff front and forward. And ultimately we need to be open-minded to all of those things. And best thing to do is not shame people into eating plant-based food. Instead, let it be experiential and really do our best to do the best job at putting forward, making it priced right, making it taste good, making it affordable, available. We work off of food pack, price, awareness, convenience, and taste. We always start with taste because if you fail there, the rest falls apart. But quite frankly, if you don't have distribution, it falls apart as well. If you don't have awareness, it falls apart as well. And if it's priced too high, it falls apart. All of those things have an efficiency mark that you have to hit on. And then you need to bring in the outside drivers, which are being aspirational, like, is it making me healthy? Does it make me feel better about myself? Those are the things that, you have to look at all of them.
That's right. Chris, you're using our talking points. Sorry, I just talked over you. Has to taste the same or better, cost the same or less, and be available, easily available and accessible. And we talk about getting things out of the frozen section and into the refrigerated section so that people let's say in the seafood counter, so that they're seeing the products exactly where they would be purchasing the seafood. And so that's another opportunity for increasing awareness and sales.
And we've been changing crops and harvesting fish. We've been doing that for millennia, right? And so, if a fish species disappears in the ocean, we replace it with another fish species that we happen to be able to catch. And the question is, can we commercialize that? In our world, we're looking at, I think the top three fish are shrimp, tuna, and salmon, right? And so those are the big ones, but kind of everything is on the menu. And that's part of the problem. If everything is on the menu, then we're indiscriminate at how we harvest. And that's a lot of the woes that are happening in our oceans. That's separate from human health. You've got, it's worthwhile noting that there's a big separation between the fishing industry, which is the harvesting of proteins, and the seafood industry, which is really, I guess you could say, include that, but it's really about the consumption of it. It's the food side of it, not just the harvesting. And once you get that protein made, our plant-based seafood follows the exact same pattern as everybody else. We make burgers using the same equipment, and fillets using the same equipment, the same packaging, the same freezing, but the harvesting is different. We can at least start with, creating products to get rid of the harvesting side, which is where a lot of the trauma is coming from. Then from there, it's about the culinary experience side, and that should be a lot of fun. It should be fun. It should be something that's enjoyable, and ultimately we should be proud of.
Agreed. And maybe back to Miles then, how do we handle people switching for environmental reasons or even health reasons from red meat to fish? And what do you all think about the possibilities? I know, I think it was Stephanie that mentioned the tank-grown algae, but what do we see as the future of algae and seaweed and that becoming more mainstream?
So for environmental reasons, first of all, I think taste is how you get people. First, it needs to taste good. It needs to be, as Chris said, a fun experience. And that's full stop. That's where it's at. It needs to be a delicious, fun experience that becomes acceptable because it's so good. And everyone has a vegan in their family. Everyone has a vegetarian in their family. And at a Christmas or a Thanksgiving, what do you do with that person? What do you feed them? And is it something that you think looks disgusting and you don't want to eat yourself? Or is it something that you feel really good about and it smells delicious and you want to try? And I think it's really about, how do you create foods? How do you create the social presence? How do you create the influencer backing to really create the critical momentum that will allow people to enjoy their culinary experience? I'm the last person that anyone probably would have guessed would have been a vegan advocate. I was a chef at the Culinary Institute of America, and that's where I was trained. And it's all conventional cooking. And it was actually Jane Goodall coming into my ear all the time, just saying, you really need to cut out the meat, Miles. You're out here doing primate conservation, cut out the meat. And so for me, it doesn't matter how many times people tell me something. It was really when Beyond Meat came out with delicious products that I was able to switch. It was really when ConAgra Gardein came out with products that were palatable and made the experience fun. I could have a fish taco. I could have sausages or whatever that was, again, nostalgic foods that allowed me to make that transition. And I think that's a very important part of the process. And algae, the co-founder actually has an algae protein company, and it's definitely the future. And as price parity comes in, it's going to be it's going to be a critical part. But how do you get past the flavor of algae at this point? And that's the kind of the trick that we're looking at as an industry is people want fishy, they don't want swampy. And so that's the trick is getting the flavor of the algae neutral, so you can get the protein, because they have rapid protein production, they have rapid omega production. 3 days you can grow what a crop can grow in 2 months, and that's amazing. And it's in a tank. It has very low controlled environmental impact, and that's where we really need to be heading with the production. And again, as Chris said, it's about how do we get that supply chain so there isn't inefficiencies that are traumatic to the planet and non-human species.
I'm going to use that line. People don't want swampy. That for 19 years, I can still remember. Sorry to be crude, but I can still remember what a fish oil burp tastes like, and that like nobody wants that, right? And so you think about it, and you've got this. The experience isn't just going in your mouth; it's actually your whole body experience, right? And so that comes down to digestibility and everything else. I think these ingredients can be. Humans can address their needs by vitamins and everything else. We've been doing that forever. I take B12 because that's how I get my B12. You shoot it in your mouth. The experience still needs to be good. And so people can aspire to eat because they eat a certain way because they're looking for certain nutrients, but they won't do it if the experience is bad. They'd rather take a pill. And ultimately, wouldn't it be nice to combine all these things? Yeah, that's the ideal. And then if you talk to any dietitian, they say eat lots of different types of food. That's how you get your nutrients. We can solve that. We need to first make sure that it tastes good. We're not going to eat it anyways.
Agreed. We have a few more questions, and we also have some from the audience, but as this industry grows and moves forward, what do you all think about the kinds of academic and professional expertise that are most urgently needed to develop this animal-free seafood?
Well, I'll tell you, I just wrapped up a 90-minute session with a behavioral change specialist who focuses on health. And we could do a lot better in our messaging. The way you get people to change their behavioral over the long time, you can get them to change short term, get them to eat, try a Beyond Burger. There's a meal. The question is, how do you get that to be something that is locked into? We need to actually be better studiers of human behavior. And part of that is your identity. I identify, sadly, as a Philadelphia Eagles fan from a decision that I made when I was 12, and it stuck with me. I'm 54 now. That identity, meat eaters have an identity, vegans have an identity, and it creates a tribal atmosphere. I think really understanding behavior is going to be critical to getting people to start changing their behavior for good. So that would be number one. Obviously, anything you can do in food science to improve products is going to be one for the plus column. And so I would imagine GFI has some pretty good studies on this one.
Indeed. And thank you. I'm going to add that to our list of things that need to happen. But we really do focus a lot on the science and technology. We have a whole department, of PhD scientists dedicated to that work, and also give out grants, open access research grants every year to scientists that are looking to solve some of the biggest problems in the alt protein industry. So, but what I would say at a high level is we need rigorous open access research across multiple disciplines, from cellular and molecular biology, engineering, and social sciences, as Chris mentioned. We need better equipment to be able to create the textures that we're looking to create. In addition, the industry needs people who know how to communicate, so good communicators, and everything that any traditional food industry would need, marketing people, sales people, people who know how to sell across geographies. So those are the things we need. But I think the science and tech is first and foremost what we need right now at this stage of the industry.
Would you add AI to that as well? I know that it's being used in scaling production of certain cellular proteins. Bioreactors are using AI to help with the processes.
That is above my pay grade, but anyone else, I'm happy to.
It's above my pay grade. It gets used a lot, but at the end of the day, I am my own AI. I decide whether something tastes good. What we can do is look at ingredients probably for functionality. At the end of the day, how complicated is that? Not overly complicated. I think we're probably overblowing what AI can actually do to one degree, because you might end up with a product that's not scalable, a bean that isn't commercially harvestable. That's not going to be very helpful. One thing we do need, and unfortunately we don't have, is time. The food takes a long time. You look at any major food corporation today, at a minimum, they're 60 years old and they're upwards of 150 years old if you look at the Nestle's of the world. And yet we do not have that kind of time to mess around to solve what we're dealing with today. We have an existential crisis that is a decade or two away in a world where food moves really, really slowly. We have to speed this up, which means we don't want one fish company or two plant-based fish company coming to market. We want hundreds of them, because these are local, just like the food system is today. If a Cargill and a Tyson can coexist, well, so can thousands of these smaller companies to come up and address their local markets. And venture capitalists are not really good about the time thing. They tend to think that things can come quickly. They tend to be transactional. We need to think outside of those venture capital mandates and really go into plugging into systems that have been developed over many, many years. You know, Good Catch has a partnership with Bumblebee. That's 120 years of distribution that's been in the making. We can take advantage of that, and we need to. And it's going to be done through collaboration, not being siloed. And everybody. It's a $1.7 trillion opportunity. If you can't find a home in that, probably not an entrepreneur. And I think ultimately we want to make sure that we're thinking big around this stuff. But again, time matters.
I'd love to mention the announcement yesterday by Brazil's biggest meat company that they acquired for $100 million, a Spanish cultivated meat company. So, and, you know, we had a little bit to do with that as well. But so we can't entirely write those incumbent companies off. They are also entering the industry in a big way. And that was a particularly exciting development in our field.
Absolutely.
We had one yesterday too. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but Southwind Foods has joined our forces, and we're moving forward in a big way. And that's a huge step forward for plant-based foods, because when you start getting these giants like Chris did with Bumblebee 2 years ago, then they start really leveraging their might to help your cause. And it's really, I don't think any of us were born vegan, and if we are, and it was about conversion, and it's about how do you bring this change about there. And as far as technology goes, I'm a chef that turned into a scientist, and so what I think about is the evolution of the human anatomy and the planet, and I'm thinking, we don't need to create something to feed humans. It's here. And so how do we prepare the things that humans were made to eat over time, and feed them healthy foods or minimally processed? And so that's why I like to prepare foods, and I'm more into processing them rather than modifying them personally, is because of that evolution of our bodies and what we were made to eat, and why I think that plant-based foods is a very healthy choice, is our intestinal tract, our gut flora, our dentition is all set up for a heavily plant-based diet with opportunistic proteins from non-human, non-plant sources. But I think that if we can take a food that we evolved to eat, and then process that in a way that's delicious to everyone, and then give it to them. And I'm not talking about chemical extractions. I'm talking about forming. I'm talking about mixing and blending, very processes that don't take the nutrients or modify the nutrients out of the food.
Thank you. And just for those that missed it, what's the acquisition that Stephanie mentioned was JBS, and their acquisition of the Spanish company Biotech Foods and the creation of a lab meat R&D center in Brazil. Very exciting. Great, thank you, Miles. So we have just a couple more questions before we get to the audience Q&A. What experience do you all believe from nonprofits would transfer to work in animal-free food tech?
I don't know. That seems like a GFI question.
I mean,
Chris, you did move from nonprofit to food tech.
That was the number a second employee at GFI, but always a venture capitalist. So.
I mean, people skills are enormously important, and it depends on where you are placed in a nonprofit, what your specialization is. We have PhD scientists, so they could certainly go straight into the field. I hope they don't, because we need them at GFI. But if you're a policy expert, you can go straight into the regulatory department of an alt protein company. And I'm speaking about GFI, and this is not a standard profile of a nonprofit employee at any other kind of nonprofit. We just happen to have these kinds of folks. I'm just a people person. No, I'm an international kind of global. I've lived and worked overseas, and so I think understanding international cultures, behaviors, markets is also important. So if you have that kind of experience, that could certainly be useful when these companies are looking to expand internationally, which many of them are right now. I hope that's good.
Yeah, no, that's super. That's spot on. And I think as Chris mentioned, and Miles had mentioned as well, just being mindful of the different palates. And I know, in the Philippines, for example, where my family's from, they're not huge on tuna, but wow, they love their tilapia. I love it.
So
Miles,
I'm from nonprofits. So I spent 10 years working in nonprofits in outside of the US, on and off. And I'm the product of a nonprofit. So what I see the opportunity is how do you leverage the learnings so poachers, for example, when you live in the jungle with poachers, you find out poachers aren't necessarily bad people. What they are is people that don't have options and are trying to come up with a solution with the resources that they have available. And I think that that's what nonprofits are really experts at, is how do you help people with minimal resources have maximum impact in their environments using their cultures. And so I think that's something that plant-based foods and industry in general could learn a lot from nonprofits. And also the dependence on heavily educated people. I think that's something that nonprofits have gotten access to, is these really passionate advocates as employees. And I think plant-based foods get to profit from that as well, because we bring in the same culture. We have people who are just extremely dedicated to the cause and the mission, just like a nonprofit. And we're able to leverage industry might to impact the change that we want to have. And I think that's also a huge change and difference that for-profit social enterprises, whether or not you want to call us a social enterprise, I think that we are using business to change the world. And I think that's what a social enterprise is. And that's a very quick way to results. And we have to be quick right now, because we don't have time to wait 200 years. We need to make the change now.
Yeah, I can't underscore enough the importance of chefs. I don't go to a textile manufacturer to design my suit. I go to a clothing designer, and that taste, whether it's a taste for fashion or taste for food, it's set by the people who are experts in that. And so there's an iterative process between what chefs do in setting the bullseye, whether that's a small audience or large, to scaling that. And that iteration is really, really critical. But if it's not led by a chef, you're not going to hit the bullseye. You might not hit the target at all. And ultimately, if you want to rapidly innovate towards the needs of the consumer, put a chef in there first and foremost as your number one hire. And then after that, you can get the scientists in there. That I think is really critical. And the more we can pull in from the culinary world, the better. I don't need to make a highly processed tuna fish or a crab, when let's say I can take hearts of palm and turn it into an experience that's good. Is it a perfect replacement for crab? No, it doesn't need to be. It's just a good culinary experience, and the chefs are the ones that are sure that happens. Once you break that idea that the only thing that can taste like crab is a crab, once you break that, everything's on the menu. You just have to decide whether you want to eat something that tastes like crab. It's the chefs that will get you there.
Thanks. One last question before we get to the Q&A that's come from the audience. Any moonshot goals for your company or organization?
Well, I can tell I was recently asked what is the moonshot for plant-based? I said it's a really, really good hot sauce of food. Now we take mediocre products and we make them delicious by putting them together with other things. A hamburger wasn't even a relevant part of our diet until the hamburger bun was incorporated into it. And nobody walks up and takes a bite out of a cow in the morning. They look for that experience of putting a bunch of things together. A1 steak sauce is vegan, right? So how do you take these things that are core protein and turn them into something good? You do it by breading it, you put it by ketchup or whatever else you feel like you need to do. And ultimately, what we need today are these little things that we add to the equation that make these experiences good. It's not just this slab of protein. Congratulations. I think long time ago, we stopped eating raw meat. We do a lot better than that now. So the moonshot in my world is how do we take these products and create the culinary experience that in everything can be included in that. Just try to make it something that's available to your consumer.
Do you have a favorite vegan tartar sauce, Chris, on the subject of
Good catch. Right on the packaging, we tell you how to make your sauces because it's actually quite easy.
Oh yeah, nice.
I have a question for the two industry guys. Do you think we need an impossible for seafood to get us to the place where we are with plant-based meat?
Well,
Can you ask that in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, so Impossible has a burger and they're using science, right? And there's just different levels of it. And the question you could ask is, well, is heme the driver or is it something else? I don't know. And the fact is, it's probably a whole bunch of things, including the fat. So, I would guarantee you that inside Sophie's Kitchen, inside Gathered Foods, and inside a bunch of these other companies, that R&D is happening. That's not novel to Impossible, but they took on a task that was really, really, really focused. But what that did was it got Beyond Meat to now compete with them. And so now we don't have one product where we have two and more that are coming. And so I think what you had in the way of Impossible was somebody saying, holy shit, we're gonna disrupt the hell out of a really, really big market. And everybody had to glob onto that. Everybody wins when that happens, but specifically the critters on the earth and in the human culinary experience. So I do think that you need the Impossible of the world to create the challenges elsewhere. I think that's legitimate. And I think, any company like, Sophie's and us and everybody else, Sophie's was around before we were, they started this process. We need that challenge. And with that comes competition, and competition creates innovation, and innovation makes everything better. That's my.
Thank you, Chris. That's excellent. That's exactly what I was thinking. And it was said in a very articulate and helpful way. So thank you.
I couldn't say it again. I can tell you that, but
Well, it's being recorded, so you can have it transcribed. And I think that exactly to that point, I don't see competition as a problem because our goal is to increase the consumption of plant-based foods, all of us. And so the more people who get us there, the better, and the faster, and the more money that's getting behind the industry, and the more acceptance we get quicker. That's just of all of us winning together. And in our business model world, it's competition and throwing punches is the way it's perceived, but really each one of those punches is just kind of like brothers or sisters, like making fun of their sibling to get them a little stronger along the way. And so each one of us is just making the other one stronger. And I think that that's a really exciting part of this process. And if you want a tartar sauce, we've got a good one that just came out. So maybe we'll get you some of that. And so I feel like the opportunity is to not look at it almost as competition, but friendly improvement through having just one-upping each other along the way. And just making sure that no one's tripping the other one up, and make it about the best next step for the industry, not about countering each other. I think that that's the way to do it. Is we think about it as a team, we want people to eat more plant-based foods. So that's the next place that we have to fight instead of we're fighting each other. I think that's the real trick.
Yeah, if you're looking at your other plant-based seafood company as your competition, you're not looking at this right. 40% of the global population relies on seafood as a core protein of some sort. There's a massive opportunity there. And right now, if you took all of the revenues in plant-based seafood globally, it's less than a rounding error. It doesn't even show up. And so the opportunities are really, really big, and there's room for everybody. Not to mention that consumers deserve the right to try different products and different brands. You don't have to be brand loyal to anything. So I'm with Miles on that one. All ships are rising, but it's important to note, I think Sophie's was probably the first company in the space, and that's 10 years old. We're looking at plant-based meat companies that have been around 40, 50 years. White Wave was founded, I think, in 1977 or 79, but it was 20 years later that it came up with silk. Another 10 years after that it became kind of widely available. Another 10 years after that it did its IPO. That life cycle, 40 years. We don't have 40 years. So everybody gets to participate in this and have fun along the way. And I would hope that more come along and make the competition even better and make the consumer experience better.
Hope so too. We've got a question in the Q&A from Rio Zukoshi. So he says, I'm curious, assuming that everyone shifts to plant-based diets, how will it impact the population of plant species? If that happens, will the food production shift to more synthetic, i.e. lab-grown plant-based protein than getting it from the wild, rather than getting it from the wild?
I would like to jump on that one really quick. So right now, it's not the amount of space, because the food is being produced in multiple X factors to feed to animal agriculture. So what we have to do is, as people shift over to plant-based diets, we're just converting agricultural space that's already being used for other species. Not only that, we're using way less of it, so we can start giving agricultural space back to native species, and then we have a healthier global ecosystem. And I think that's really the misconception that we've been fed by industry over my lifetime, my grandparents' lifetime, is that these species are just the grass that they sit on, and that's not true. They're the grass that's harvested in the fields around them and brought to them. They're the B12 they're inoculated with. They're the organic substitutes that are given to them as well. So it's not as simple as we don't need more space to produce the plant-based foods. We need to convert the space from animal foods and eliminate the redundancy there.
I have nothing to add to that. That was spot on.
And my comment in the sidebar, the feed conversion ratios. We always talk about those. The most efficient terrestrial animal is the chicken, and it takes 7 calories in to get 1 calorie out for chicken. It's about the same for seafood, farmed seafood, I should say. So, and we can get that better. So we need to make plant-based seafood, because that would be a massively more efficient way to use plants.
Thank you. And how long do you think it will take for us to see price parity of alternative meats in the market, in the seafood market?
We have to refine it a little bit differently than that. I mean, is there price parity between a Wagyu steak and the steak at McDonald's? No. So you have to put that, you have to be, categorize that appropriately. We can water down things. We can make, if we were making effectively the slurry replacement for a Subway product, you can get pretty cheap with that in the plant-based world too. It can be efficient. If you're dealing with byproducts, dairy, a hamburger is a byproduct of dairy industry, right? So that's going to stay pretty cheap for quite some time. Price parity is I'd say it's in the eye of the beholder to one degree or another, but it has to be one that is respective of what's the dish that's being served. And the reality is we're there today in some cases we're not, and that's going to be the way it is going to be, I think, in perpetuity.
The level playing field is also super important, and I love the research that GFI puts out, because it makes us all a lot smarter together. And I think that plant-based lobbying is really the future here, and countering, because the reason industries have what they have is because of the lobbying groups that have come together to fight for the narratives that people believe. And so plant-based labeling, got distracted there, is something that's going to require lobbyists. And we're going to have people who have their seafood products named after chickens saying that plant-based food shouldn't call their plant-based foods plant-based seafood. So, I mean, we have stuff like that people here have had to deal with because of names. And so it's just, some of it's just silliness. And we really need to have a lobbying group for plant-based foods. So the subsidies level out the playing field for plant-based foods, just like they do for animal agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, scaling is a big part of it. And if you are left out of a K through 12 buying cycle because you're missing one ingredient that was designed to be in there by the meat industry, well, is that fair? You know, we've got farmers' wages are completely separate from any other wage, you know, because quite frankly, that's a subsidy to you know, a lot of farming practices. So we can do better from a policy standpoint, and we can do better from a buying standpoint. If you're price protected because you can dump all of your dairy into prisons and in schools, that's not fair. What if we were to have that? Wouldn't that be really nice? Wouldn't that actually advance the cause? Boy, I'd love to be able to tap into that, but we're a couple of decades away from actually breaking that, I think.
And we can also and are working to free up government funding for open access research. And we're doing that all around the world. And if we did get, you know, let's say $11 billion a year into research for plant-based or cultivated meat, we would be able to, you know, create these products more cheaply and improve the equipment, and we would reach price parity and taste parity more quickly. So those are also things that we're doing globally.
And I'll add that there's countries around the globe, China being one of them, that they will make this happen because of how they make decisions around policy, and then they will be the leader. And we can get in our own way. It's going to happen. And as a plant-based food manufacturer, I can go there. I don't have herds of cattle sitting in Wyoming. I can go and set up a plant in Shanghai and do this tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but let's say a year from now. So those are the type of thing that we have agility on that the farming system doesn't. And we can take advantage of that, but so can governments. And ultimately, I think that's one where we will actually thrive.
Are you seeing shifts in government participation in this industry? Are you seeing shifts potentially in subsidies to more alternatives, or even just away from extractive ag in the ocean space?
In the ocean space, we're seeing it global. We're seeing governments globally investing in alternative proteins at a very large scale. I was just in the UAE, and I talked about the developments in the Middle East. Qatar just made a major investment. Now I'm already forgetting which was it beyond. It was in Just Foods. So they're now going to have a massive cultivated meat factory in Qatar to supply not just Qatar, but the entire Middle East region. And, you know,
and North Africa. I mean, so they actually serve a huge part of North Africa. So you're looking at parts of the world that have just kind of been ignored. And now you're having government agencies and sovereign funds back this transformation. And they're going to be the ones that draw the innovation, because that's where it's going to be. And that right now is quite competitive, but there's not a lot of companies to draw into this. They're too small. And so this is going to be, I think the next decade is going to be very, very interesting for some of these companies to find a really growth pattern in addressing different cultures around the globe.
And the reason that they're doing this is for food security reasons. You're seeing the governments that the countries that are most food insecure and are most worried about their food security going forward with climate change are the ones that are investing most heavily. But then there's also China, which is massive, and it's not a very arable. There's very little arable land in China, so they also have a food security problem. So you're going to see them rapidly catching up with the rest of the world.
Yeah, exciting to see what's happening in Singapore as well. But yeah, I'd really love to see the US start to dedicate more funds to these alternatives, or at the very least stop subsidizing as heavily as they do the fishing industry and animal ag. But anyhow, work in progress. I know that we just have a few minutes left, and I believe that the ALI team had a few announcements, but just wondering if you all would like to share anything you're excited about or announcements. Miles, you mentioned you guys launched a tartar sauce. I'm excited to check that out. Anything you guys
Yeah,
would like to share?
I mean, it's about having a great experience all around, and it's about having the partners that are doing it to help you do it faster. And I think that that's something that both Good Catch and Sophie's Kitchen really focus on. And I think that's why we're both being so successful, is that we're focused on making great food efficiently, and that's it. And I think that's really how we're going to win this thing.
Yeah, and on that front, we just opened our Cultivated Food Labs, which is a subsidiary of Gathered Foods in Vancouver, and they're working on things that aren't even seafood. I mean, everything is on the table when you have a lab, and you can tell people in a lab, I want you to work on this. But when they're not doing that, they're doing all sorts of other stuff, and I'm really excited to see what kind of experiments are going on. Failures oftentimes make some of the greatest products, and 3M was one of the companies that pioneered that concept, and we want to see that happening throughout our entire food system. Should be really exciting time coming
Are
up.
you referring to the sticky notes?
I think I don't know if this is true, but the Gardein fish fillet was kind of a failed chicken product, and that's one of their biggest sellers. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about kind of what's in our lab, but we have some things coming out in Q1 that I think in my world are game changing as far as a protein goes. Call it what you will, but as an experiential protein, it's remarkable. So those things are it can only get better for us. Animal ag is what it is. A chicken today is going to taste like a chicken tomorrow, but you might get a higher end one and a lower end one, but it's still the same thing. We can only get better. There will come a time where our food is way better than the animal counterpart. It just will be. Just give us a little bit of time, and it'll get there.
And one step further, there's going to be a time when people don't want their food to be associated with animals. So 50 years from now, the parity and likeness to other animals won't be important to the consumer who grew up on plant-based foods. It won't make sense to them. And so that's why linking to animal-based foods is an intermediary solution and not a long-term need, I think. And so that's why I'm so about how do we process these foods in such a smart way that the foods that we were made to thrive on are what we're actually eating, not something similar to something else that we don't need.
Absolutely. Stephanie, do you have any announcements you'd like to share? I know you posted in the chat about some job openings at GFI.
Oh, actually, I was just mentioning that we have a career event coming up on December 14th, and I've posted the link to sign up for that. So since careers was one of the questions, and there are people attending who are interested in getting involved in this industry, I would encourage them to join that event. And also we have once monthly GFI Ideas group that gets together, and they also have a Slack community, and it is a moderated kind of presentation where a startup will present their product, and there will be folks talking in the chat, so forth. So you can look for that on our website as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. So unless somebody from ALI would like to jump in and make some closing announcements, Christine, Hi.
Hello, that was a wonderful panel. Wow, it was so engaging and I learned so much. So yeah, thank you all panelists for being here and thank you audience members for joining. This is the last panel of our 4-day conference. So it was a really great way to end it. And I hope that there will be more businesses like yours to help more people go vegan. Yeah, so and the announcement I have is, although this is the last panel, we do have 3 workshops coming up. The next one is in 10 minutes, and that's on next steps for research in this area on aquatic animal welfare. And then we have one at 2 p.m. Eastern on careers in animal welfare. So Stephanie, I'm really glad you mentioned that resource and we can share it with the group. And then the last workshop that we have will start at 2:45 p.m. EST on collaboration and next steps on animal welfare and sustainability intersectionality. So thank you all so much. Yeah, that was all, Elise. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.